Cincinnati and Dayton are at a housing crossroads. Both cities are short thousands of affordable units, and each is taking steps to create more of it. Councilmember Jeff Cramerding is working to guide Cincinnati's housing strategy.
Over the next year, we hope to see a number of really new market rate housing communities with retail underneath. So we're creating housing, and we're also creating catalytic investment in the neighborhoods that need it.
Dayton City Commissioner Shenise Turner-Sloss promises to rebuild area communities one block at a time, and along with Councilmember Cramerding, is focused on solutions.
The city administration, they're looking at quadrants of the city, and so right now we just repealed some past legislation for the community reinvestment area to now include, again, some more of those economically challenged areas that were not included.
On this episode, we're back with a solutions sidebar. Brick by Brick talks to Cincinnati Councilmember Cramerding and Dayton City Commissioner Turner-Sloss about the need for more housing, what types might work best, how Capital A affordable housing fits in, and what it's going to take to get there. My colleagues Hernsley Gare Jr. and Amico Moore join me at the end for some takeaways. And a couple of quick notes. This uncut interview was recorded before the election. That's important because we speculated on a few federal funding sources. And there's an online video version of this conversation you can find on our webpage or on the PBS app. Let's get into it. This is Brick by Brick, solutions for a thriving community.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to leading support from Deborah and Robert Chavez, Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and the George and Margaret McLean Foundation, with additional major support from AES Ohio Foundation, Lori Johnston, Murray and Agnes Seasongood Good Government Foundation, Diane and Dave Moshe, the Robert and Jean Penny Endowment Fund of the Dayton Foundation, the Robert and Adele Schiff Family Foundation, and more. Thank you.
Hello to you at home or wherever you're watching or listening from. With me in the studio today are Councilmember Jeff Cramerding and Dayton City Commissioner Shenise Turner-Sloss. Welcome to Brick by Brick.
Thank you.
It's great to be here.
As you know, people are suffering in terms of trying to find affordable housing, no matter what their income level. And I know things have been done both in Cincinnati and Dayton, but maybe not enough. So I wanted to bring you here today to just get the latest information and also, as a conversation, just talks amongst ourselves, just to find out what has been done. So again, thanks for being here. And City Commissioner, I'll start with you. If you could describe the state of housing in Dayton.
Well, like any other city across the state of Ohio, we are dealing with the challenges of the housing crisis. But I have to back up. A lot of people negate the fact that we're still recovering from the economic downturn in 2008. We were hit very hard by predatory lending, the foreclosure crisis, as well as a lot of manufacturing jobs that left the Dayton area. So when you have what we're seeing right now, the housing crisis, again, it has been exacerbated by a number of things. COVID-19, there were a number of tornadoes that blew through our area. So we're trying to right-size our community, all the while dealing with a number of dilapidated, abandoned properties that we have throughout the city of Dayton.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
You're certainly dealing with a lot.
We are dealing with a lot, as well as the growing unhoused population that we're seeing in the city of Dayton. And I will add, too, what we're finding out is a number of things. One, some of the people that we're seeing in our community, they're not necessarily from the Dayton community. We're also seeing that with the crisis of mental health as being a major issue in our Dayton area, many people, they do not want the services. They do not want the help. And so you have those competing forces that we're dealing with, the shortages of housing stock that we have available, let alone the quality of housing that we have in the city of Dayton. So we're rolling up our sleeves. We're looking at a number of different initiatives. I was proud to support and draft as well as introduce legislation for the priorities set forth by the Dayton City Commission. I'm looking at how do we really start tackling this issue head on and identifying, the priorities. And in doing so, we were able to create the housing policy framework, which was unanimously approved by all 5 council members. And so we're doing everything we need to do. In addition, I will add the $138 million from the American Rescue Act plan that we received, ARPA dollars. We like to frame it as the Dayton recovery dollars. Out of that $138 million, we were able to utilize 50 $55 million into our neighborhood. Now, that is a drop in the bucket considering all of the issues that we have ongoing. So those are just some of the things that we're looking at, again, best practices across the state and beyond.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll get into some of those things a little bit later. Councilmember Cramerding, for a long time you chaired the Housing Committee, Equitable Growth and Housing. What are things looking like in Cincinnati in terms of state of housing?
Yeah, in Cincinnati, we are growing. People want to move back into the city of Cincinnati after many decades of decline and people moving out of the city. So we're seeing a reversal of that trend. Many of our neighbors are neighbors of choice, which are growing quickly, which is a good thing. But with that comes associated problems. When people want to move into a neighborhood, it means rising housing values and rising rents, which are also good things, but it does create issues of displacement and people no longer being able to afford to live in their neighborhood. And this is neighborhoods in Cincinnati like Madisonville and Kennedy Heights, which are now very, very popular. So what we need to do is build housing to meet that new demand. I mean, people with money are going to move where they want, and we need to have housing for those people, or else they're going to be moving into other apartments, other houses, and be causing displacement.
So in the most recent budget, then, Cincinnati Council allocated $10.5 million for additional housing. What does that look like?
Yes, I mean, our housing plan is also multifaceted. We passed our Connected Communities Initiative last year, which makes building housing in Cincinnati easier, especially along our main thoroughfares, our major quarters. So that makes development easier. And then providing the cash to make some of these connected communities happen is going to be very exciting. So putting $10.5 million in, we've got a number of housing projects in the pipeline. So over the next year, we hope to see a number of really new market rate housing communities with retail underneath. So we're creating housing, and we're also creating catalytic investment in the neighborhoods that need it.
Yeah, good news. And we'll talk about connected communities a little bit later in the conversation. Commissioner, for Dayton, the budget includes about $35 million as efforts to remove blight and repair housing continue. And then in March 2024, voters approved Issue 6, extending a 0.25% income tax renewal, which will bring in an estimated $650,000 per year for 8 years for the city to invest in housing. What's the latest?
So thank you for bringing that up. So very excited to add that additional bucket, as we call it, to housing, the $650,000. The voters unanimously, I think the percent was like 71% of voters supported this income tax levy. And we are using that as a model, in fact, to leverage the dollars that our land bank was able to receive from the Ohio Department of Development, the $7 million, I might add. So that $650,000 will be used to provide additional housing opportunities and options and access to those who are interested in home ownership, as well as assisting existing homeowners. So again, we're trying to utilize what we currently have against what we have been awarded, whether it's through the state, the federal government. So we're using those dollars again to address some of the housing concerns throughout the city.
You mentioned the land bank, so let's talk about that a little bit further. Ohio awarded Montgomery County the most of any county in Ohio, $7 million to buy and rehabilitate properties for income-eligible residents. I think I was reading that this was for 40 new properties and 24 to be renovated. Is there any further information about this? I don't know if you're still taking bids, and when would these be built? I know this is the county and you're the city.
Yes, that is correct. So right now we are in the process of developing the MOU so that we can, in fact, leverage those dollars, the $650,000 over to the land bank for the additional resources. So we're in conversation as to what that will look like, and also the partners that will be utilized to distribute those funds out into the various communities that are aligned for this particular project. So we're very excited about it. As you mentioned, Montgomery County was the largest award of the $7 million. And we believe that this is the shot in the arm that we need to start getting a number of those dilapidated or derelict properties back online to provide access for future home ownership.
Very good. Councilmember Cramerding, the zoning changes that were passed this summer, connected communities, you briefly talked about what that is. I'm wondering, what can we expect to see? So I'm assuming more dense housing, and when would that happen?
it's a multi-part plan. The Connected Communities was the first part to make the development easier, which was very, very important. Our zoning code was very outdated, going back to the 1970s, where cities were dying, and we changed our zoning code so that the city would look more like the suburbs. Single-family houses, restaurants with large surface parking lots, and that strategy of making the city look like the suburbs failed because we're not. So this change, Connected Communities, was to go back to our roots: denser housing, retail, restaurants on the bottom, housing on top, less parking requirements, and putting parking behind buildings. So that Connected Communities makes that possible. So that was the first step. The next step is providing the cash incentives to make a lot of these big developments happen in neighborhoods that need development. Things are going very well in the city of Cincinnati and other urban areas, but development is still harder and it still needs an incentive. So as we talked about, we put $10.5 million in during our carryover process. That'll be a bridge. And we also had the Cincinnati Futures Commission, which we had labor leaders, business leaders, civic leaders looking at the city's budget, and they identified a need for us and said that they thought a 0.1% earnings tax is necessary to make this development continue. So there will be definitely a lot of talk about that, Cincinnati Futures and our housing earnings tax this year, which will provide the financial incentives to really make Connected Communities happen and build them out.
That's great. May I add, please?
Yes, please.
We're actually doing the very same thing in terms of updating that zoning code, because you hit the nail on the head. Our zoning code is outdated for about 20 years there. So the staff they're very committed. They're dedicated, if you will, to updating the zoning code. We're also looking at just recently, matter of fact, I think it was last week before last, we expanded our nuisance abatement definition to include vehicles, large drums, outdoor storage, anything that is wasteful and harmful to the environment, tires included. So we're looking at various mechanisms to address those issues. And they always say, the state of Ohio, we travel in packs, right? We always, many other municipalities, we follow each other's lead. And so that's exactly what we're doing.
That's great.
I'm glad that you were mentioning that, because that was actually my next question. It seems like Dayton has a more low-key approach to zoning changes. They kind of just make things without one huge, big zoning change. And I was wondering if density is a key concern or a stabilization.
Absolutely. It is a concern across the state. As you mentioned, many of us are having those various challenges. And so we're looking at more of our economic distress and challenging areas. For instance, we have just expanded our community reinvestment areas to those more distressed areas to entice and increase development, to also provide a tax abatement for 15 years or 100%. So we're trying to find ways to attract developers into the urban core, as well as providing those mechanisms for our existing homeowners.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that also. And what about, isn't there talk of a housing fund too, a trust fund?
So it's interesting that you brought that up. So I have been working very diligently to bring that forth. My hope is that I will have the support of the rest of the members so that we can get something passed. A housing trust fund is definitely needed, especially with all of the investment that we're making. The $650,000 that you mentioned with the income tax renewal, that is an opportunity for us to expand the use of those dollars and to really start addressing these issues that we're seeing in housing.
The community reinvestment areas, how many areas are there and where are they?
So they are all throughout the city of Dayton, but once upon a time, they were very fragmented, if you will. So what we've decided to do, thanks to our law department, as well as our planning and neighborhood development department, the city administration, they're looking at quadrants of the city. And so right now, we just repealed some past legislation for the community reinvestment area to now include, again, some more of those economically challenged areas that were not included. So now, again, we're looking at the southwest quadrant of the city, the northwest quadrant of the city, looking at those various areas so that we can make sure that we are expanding those opportunities across the city.
Let's talk about Cincinnati's housing fund. So as we alluded to before, for a while, there was a chunk of it we couldn't use. And how will this evolve in the future? You mentioned that some of this new money is going to be going to that.
Yes, $10 million going right into the housing fund, which is administered by our community partner, the Cincinnati Development Fund. We're very excited. Our community development staff at City Hall is wonderful, but we found that being able to shift dollars out of City Hall, getting them a little farther away from the politics, lets them move more nimbly. So we look forward to what they're going to do with this next round of money, and we are determined to keep the money going and to keep these housing projects going with our partner at CDF and our other partners as well.
Yeah, you were shaking your head. I guess you realize the importance of having partners.
Absolutely. They make us do our job better, if you will, and they are a necessary entity. And for us to address the various issues that we're having in our community, from the social services, from the housing developers that we have across the city of Dayton and beyond, the businesses, our local unions. So it's an opportunity for us to build those partnerships to address the various issues that we're seeing. So partnerships are definitely a key. We have between the Montgomery County, Dayton area, Habitat for Humanity, County Corp. We have just the list goes on in terms of the partners that we're seeing. And East End Community Services, I cannot negate the work that they're doing in East Dayton right now.
I hope you're enjoying our conversation with Cincinnati Councilmember Jeff Cramerding and Dayton City Commissioner Shenise Turner-Sloss. There's more still ahead following this short break. This is Brick by Brick.
Brick by Brick is made possible thanks to the generous support of so many, including Rosemary and Mark Schlachter, the Camden Foundation, Patty and Fred Heldman, Dee Dee and Gary West, the Stephen H. Wilder Foundation, Judith and Thomas Thompson, a donation in memory of Frank and Margaret Lenhart, and more. Thank you. We couldn't do this work without you.
Hey, it's Hearns Laguerre Jr., one of the team members behind Brick by Brick. You know, our new show is about solutions for a thriving community. But if you think about it, we all have a different perspective of what a thriving community should look like. That's why we need to hear from you. We want to know what a thriving community looks like to you. Maybe it's more housing, more parks, or stores, or even safer sidewalks. Whatever your vision, we hope you'll share it with us. You can do that by heading to the Brick by Brick show page on ctconnect.org or thinktv.org. There you'll find an audience question button. Just fill out the survey and that's it. We look forward to sharing your hopes and dreams with the rest of our neighbors in future episodes. Thank you.
Welcome back to Brick by Brick. I'm Ann Thompson. Let's get back into our conversation with Cincinnati Councilmember Jeff Cramerding and Dayton City Commissioner Shenise Turner-Sloss. And then Emiko Hearns and I will be back at the end for some reflections. So these are all great ideas, like housing fund, connected communities. Some people might say, well, these solutions are going to take forever. Like, how am I going to see, housing, people who are struggling to find housing? And based on reports we've heard over the years, we're short tens of thousands of units. So what types of housing do you think would make a difference? Would it be single-family homes, middle housing, large-scale apartment buildings? And what are the challenges to each of those?
In Cincinnati, our emphasis is going to be on larger scale, denser developments along the corridors. We did pass a transit levy, so our bus system has totally been revamped. It's much more vital, a lot more frequency, a lot more options for people. So we think our corridors are a chance to grow, and we're talking about mixed use housing. That's just an opportunity to really provide to catalyze and change and revitalize a neighborhood. I mean, we've seen in many neighborhoods, if you get a new restaurant into, maybe a brewery, and housing on top, and it's a new development, people are like, this neighborhood's moving in the right direction. And when people feel confident in their neighborhood, they are willing to stay, people are going to move in, and people are going to invest. So it's those types of projects that we have seen have the most dramatic impact. I will say that sometimes for people, those are the most scary because they are dense. Some people have got negative perceptions about apartments, renters, and large-scale developments. So we're definitely are going to be overcoming that. That's why in Cincinnati, these first round of model connected communities that we're going to be building are going to be critical so people can see that there's success and say, oh, I want that in my neighborhood.
And what do you think about?
I think that is exactly right, Councilman. We're doing this exact same thing. we have seen, rather, a great deal of investment in our core in our downtown area. And so now we want to expand that out into the outer ring, into our neighborhoods, where people are able to have the backyard, where they're able to have the 3 and 4 bedroom home with 2.5 bath, right? We know those things are in place, as well as making sure that accessibility is addressed. Our senior homes, we had a great deal of investment in our senior homes that we've been able to provide with various partnerships through our Dayton recovery dollars, the ARPA dollars, the federal dollars that we were able to receive. So again, using those various tools and mechanisms, that's just one in our toolbox to address the issues that we're having. But again, just pulling on that thread in reference to the CRA, the community investment areas, expanding those areas and allowing developers and other businesses, whatever have you, to tap into that tax abatement for the 15 years at 100%.
So we've spoken with developers who sometimes get frustrated about all the red tape that they have to jump through. And I'm wondering if the cities need to ease that for developers who say that it's too hard to build with lots of restrictions.
So that's the excuse of every developer, right? But you have to have safeguards in place, because at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that we are working in the best interest of the residents. And so we cannot negate or ignore the concerns of our residents on behalf of a developer because they want to come in and swallow up all of the parcels, whatever have you, and not meeting the parking variances or the zoning requirements, whatever have you. But we have to learn to work together and find that common ground, that compromise, so we can address the concerns of the residents of the neighborhood as a whole, but all the while hold firm to the developer and their requests. And that's why with a number of our development agreements, we have clawback clauses that are in place. Say, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, then these are the repercussions that would take place. So again, it's a very delicate balance, if you will. We want to make Dayton attractive. We want developers to come into our area, but all the while we have to be firm but fair, if you will, in terms of how we're doing business with the developers.
What are some of those clauses? What are some examples?
So in terms of, I'll give you a prime example with all of the development that we are seeing in downtown Dayton with the arcade, beautiful renovation of a beacon, a staple in our community, in the heart of our economic engine downtown. We were able to have in place community benefit agreements where there is an agreement with our Dayton Public School District to provide opportunities for employment, internships, externships, whatever have you. We also are looking at fair wages and having those employed in those various clauses, making sure that we have, just recently we're in conversation right now, and hopefully we'll see that before us, making sure we have project labor agreements in place. So looking at those various things to, again, hold our developers accountable, but understanding that we are all working for the better interest of our businesses, our residents, our laborers, and those who are doing business in the city as a whole.
What about Cincinnati and any red tape that developers complain about?
Yeah, I think it is a problem. In Cincinnati, we're fortunate that we have a model in 3CDC, the City Center Development Corporation, which has done tremendous work in Over the Rhine. I mean, it's really been it would have been unfathomable 20 years ago to think about Over the Rhine and what it looks like today. So 3CDC has done tremendous work. They have had that balance where they've done tremendous development. They have kept the community happy. I mean, it's very difficult, and you can never keep everybody happy, but 3CDC has done a good job of community relations. They are focused on one neighborhood. So with the city, as we move through this year and talk about economic development and more resources, it's finding a model like that, which will be different because this will be working all across the city. And can we, working with the partners and tools we have in place, like the port, which is very strong, like CDF, but find that structure where a organization can go into a neighborhood and do some heavy lifting and pull off a project and provide that support, get it done, and then move into the next neighborhood. So that's going to be a topic and a reoccurring theme in Cincinnati this year.
Let's take a step back and talk about preventing homelessness. Mm-hmm. Both cities are trying to do it. Right to counsel is the right for somebody facing eviction to have an attorney, as you know. There is a pilot program underway in Dayton, so how is that going?
It's going very well. Thank you for posing that question. And in fact, we just had a work session last week, if you will, the early midweek of October, with a number of the partners from Learn to Earn, as well as Omega CDC. The list goes on and on in terms of who are all part of it. Blue Meridian was one of the major contributors, philanthropists that contributed to this pilot program, as well as Stout, who's doing a number of the research and the data collection, if you will. And now we're at a stage where they are conducting a cost-benefit analysis. There will be 125. It sounds very minute at this stage in the game, but again, it is a pilot.
You have to start someplace.
You have to start somewhere. So there are 125 families that will be assisted in the northwest quadrant of the city of Dayton, and that area was identified with the review of the data and the eviction heat map that indicated that 45406 particular zip codes, 0605 as well as 03, were areas where we saw an increase in eviction. So again, one of the if you will, negative rhetoric behind right to counsel is that everyone's going to have an attorney and there's no defense. Well, there is a process in place. There is a process in place in terms of if you, in fact, have a defense to receive the counsel that is needed before eviction court. So again, they're identifying the families at this juncture, and the hope is that the pilot is a success so that we can expand those areas.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that people with an attorney are going to be allowed to stay in their home.
Exactly.
But maybe they don't get an eviction on their record.
Exactly. And then we've been able to do something innovative as well with our clerk of courts, where there is a eviction seal process that we have in place. So they're working in tangent, if you will, together to make sure that they are able to address the issues of evictions.
And I know you have some mediation too.
We have mediation as well, yes.
Yeah. What's going on in Cincinnati? I know Cincinnati is maybe moving at a little slower of a pace, but there are things that are happening.
Oh, absolutely. No, we are putting more money into our eviction prevention every month. Our capacity grows, including with our partners at UC Law. So it's a tremendous program. My colleague Mika Owens has been leading on it and will continue to lead on it. It's been tremendous, and it is so important. Homelessness touches so many people, but I've got school-age children, and when you're in school and kids, their friends disappear in the middle of the year, and they're like, where did they go? Yeah. And it's almost always a result of housing instability or an eviction. So it's critically important. And another thing we've learned is historically Ohio, because of state law and things, has been very weak on issues to protect tenants. And that is a reason that some of these very large out-of-state institutional investors that are often predatory sought out Ohio as an area to make a lot of money. And in doing so, they created a lot of turnover and created, as I said, sometimes they were predatory and sometimes they took advantage of tenants. So having these protections in place makes Ohio, makes our cities less vulnerable. These types of institutions that sometimes provide substandard housing and substandard living conditions.
And one of them has a big presence in Dayton.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad you touched on that in terms of our state legislators in the state and the preemption of rent controls, as well as what you said to the tenants protections that we don't have in place. Mm-hmm. So you hit the nail on the head and finding ways and means to combat those barriers that we have across the state.
Some might argue that capital A affordable housing has been left out of the conversation. A quarter of the population in Southwest Ohio, I was reading, are severely rent burdened, and that means that people spend more than 50% of their income on housing. How can we encourage more subsidized development? And are you willing to relax the rules and restrictions to streamline city support for any project that incorporates or qualifies for a low-income housing tax credit?
Well, I will tell you from the state tax credit, we're seeing a change in the scoring and the focus where it is more difficult in the urban core. And so we won't have that ability to utilize with the Ohio Housing Financing Agency. We won't have that ability to tap into the LIHTC, the low income housing tax credits any longer, because they're changing the formula. They're changing the model of the scoring. So that is something that we're going to have to pivot, if you will, and find other ways and mechanisms of how we're going to address this issue, and providing those incentives to our developers in having the various use of mixed income units across the various communities.
That is a challenge. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it is a challenge. I agree with the challenges that our federal partners provide. We're going to have to work with them, lobby for more flexibility, use some local tools for more flexibility. So that's part of it. And in Cincinnati, we just need to keep in mind that the more housing we build, the more the housing crisis will relax, because there are people, again, moving into the city that now have means, and they're going to live here. And if we do not create housing for them, they're going to be displacing people. So every new unit we create, that's alleviating the problem to an extent.
In Bond Hill, there are going to be a number of apartments that are subsidized.
It's great.
That would be one
Great.
example.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely correct in terms of lobbying and having those conversations at the federal level, because what we have seen in Dayton is we're looking at a projected 16.9% decrease in our community block grant dollars. Last year, we saw a decrease. There was a nationwide cut of over $200 million. That was for home. And for CDBG for 2025, we're looking at a $500 million cut nationwide. And so a part of that is because of additional 20 plus communities are now entitlement to these funds. And so as we're looking at the various challenges in getting more properties online, we also have competing forces that we're looking at, from the cuts from the state, from the federal, as well as the other tight restrictions that we have in place when you talk about the tax credits itself from the Ohio Housing Financing Agency.
As we think through this housing crisis, I'm wondering if you guys are looking at other cities and saying, like,
yes.
They're doing it well. And so who are you looking at and what are they doing?
Pittsburgh have a number of models. I would say we cannot talk about housing if we're not talking about equity, wealth distribution, and we talk about the history of redlining. And when you are looking at the Black and Brown community. And so Washington is doing something magnificent in terms of creating a fund, a covenant program, they call it, so they can have low interest loans to assist with down payment assistance, as well as the purchase price of the home itself. So looking at Washington, state of Washington, Pittsburgh, again, as I mentioned, Cleveland is doing some innovative things. Cincinnati is doing some great things. So again, just modeling after various cities and across the country.
Yeah, Minneapolis was a big model when we were looking at connected communities. That Minneapolis showed that the changes in zoning can produce new housing, so that was success. We were looking at other cities too, trying to decrease regulation and see who's growing faster than us and why.
I always like to end on a positive. So what gives you hope in Cincinnati and Dayton that we can begin to solve the housing crisis?
I would say conversations such as this. A number of people are invested in this conversation. They are invested in this work. And that's exactly what it's going to take. It's going to take work. It's going to take out-of-the-box thinking. And the old way is not necessarily going to be the new way of addressing the issues that we are facing today. There are a number of issues, as we mentioned through this conversation, from mental health, from wage gap, that we're experiencing, labor shortages, the housing voucher program, the shortages that we're seeing with that, and just people just don't necessarily have the means to maintain a home. So again, you are starting to look at a whole gamut of issues that we're facing right now, but it is that innovative spirit that you have to have, and the ability to have these conversations and the ability to problem solve, right? You can't just have conversation and pass legislation. I always say you got to have the programming and funding to go along with it. And so that's exactly what it's going to take.
Councilmember?
Yeah, as far as ending on a positive note, I started at City Hall as a council aide 25 years ago. And just for years and decades, the population of Cincinnati was decreasing. And the theme, the mantra was Cincinnati is dying. And you went in City Hall every week and Cincinnati is dying. How are we going to turn this around? And that's didn't start in the 90s. It started in the 60s and 70s. So for 30 years, the city is dying. So we've turned that around, and people are moving back into the city, which is a good thing. And I think we as cities have not taken the moment to celebrate that. And so, we are turning things around. People are moving back to the city. That has created a number of consequences. Housing rents have gone up. Home prices have gone up. Good and bad. I mean, when home prices go up, that's how many middle-class people accumulate wealth, especially Black and brown people, and especially union households. So those increased housing values are a good thing, but they also come with increased housing, and they also come with some displacement. So with good things, there are bad things that we're grappling with. So we are dealing with these effects, but overall, we are living in a very fortunate time when people are moving back to the city, and we're dealing with the side effects as opposed to trying to turn around cities that were dying. So it's been a very fortunate time to serve on Cincinnati City Council. Thanks
to both of you for being on Brick by Brick. Dayton City Commissioner Shenise Turner-Sloss and Cincinnati Councilmember Jeff Cramerding. Thanks so much.
It's an honor.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, if you're interested in watching this conversation with Cincinnati Councilmember Jeff Cramerding and Dayton City Commissioner Shenise Turner-Sloss, you'll be able to find it at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Or if you want to learn more about Brick by Brick in general, there are also plenty of web articles and videos online. And you can find videos directly through your TV on the PBS app. And don't forget to keep us honest by sharing your feedback via the big green buttons on our show page. We've come together again. Time to think about the challenges and solutions of both cities. It's time for takeaways with Emiko Moore. She joins us remotely.
Hello.
And Hearns Laguerre Jr.
Hey, everyone.
Hearns, why don't you go first?
Well, yeah, and first off, I really enjoyed the cross-city exchange that you had with both city leaders. I think it highlighted the importance of conversation and comparison across the country. Commissioner Turner-Sloss, she pointed to the very conversation that you guys were having as something that could lead to more solutions. And both brought up different cities throughout the conversation, whether it was the positive outcomes of zoning in Minneapolis or the low interest loans in Washington. And, they brought stuff closer to home when they mentioned eviction protection through data analytics in Cincinnati or the pilot program of Right to Counsel in Dayton. There's no way one city could have or experiment with all these solutions. So I think seeing what works in different cities, maybe cities that's similar to the one that you're in, I think it could allow for people to try different things and see, okay, it worked here and we have similar, demographics, so maybe it'll work here as well. And I think if you're able to do that, if we're all able to do that as, cities across the country, we'll see exponential solutions happening in cities across the country.
Thanks for that. Emiko, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. And I also think that you can get a better picture of all the challenges and the types of balancing acts that council members and commissioners do in order to adapt to the changing housing needs. You've got expected factors in housing, your housing stock, investment or disinvestment in neighborhoods, but then you also have so many unexpected ones. For example, in Dayton, it was hit by not only COVID, but a 2019 tornado, which took a lot of homes, loss of manufacturing jobs, and predatory lending. These were all big hits. So how well can a city pivot to address these, and what makes a city more nimble to solve issues and adapt more quickly are significant. I think cities can learn a lot from each other, and I think we should bring them together a lot more to share ideas and have these kind of discussions. And one thing that both cities mentioned, the impact of predatory lending, particularly in Ohio because of weaker tenant laws, and how this has impacted housing instability and homelessness in both cities.
Good points. Well, I was thinking about capital A affordable housing and the frustrations that both Councilmember Cramerding and City Commissioner Turner-Sloss had with talking about the red tape and how they needed to think through and lobby people possibly complaining that the low-income housing tax credit was just too complicated, also known as LIHTC. Well, one thing is maybe they need to look for the right developers. I was wondering, if we could use the model of Margie Stagmeyer, who wrote the book Blighted. We interviewed her for a podcast. She doesn't take subsidies. She raised $12 million to buy Summerdale Apartments in Atlanta and found one bank to loan her the money at 2.99%. She says you have to get the community on board. And then another example, incremental developer Monty Anderson in Dallas, he doesn't believe in subsidies. We're going to talk to him for a podcast. He partners with some tenants, makes personal loans to others, and teaches them to raise the down payment needed from friends and family at a much smaller level. Thanks for your thoughts, guys.
No problem.
Thank you.
That's our show. Thanks again to City Commissioner Turner-Sloss and Councilmember Cramerding for joining us. If you like what you hear, please rate and review our podcast. It helps make it easier to find. We hope you learned something. And if you did, please share it out with your friends and family. Maybe even your city leaders or neighborhood organizers. For Hearns Laguerre Jr. and Amico Moore, I'm Ann Thompson. We'll be back soon with more solutions. Take care. Our show is produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ann Thompson, with reporting and story editing from Hearns Laguerre Jr. and Amico Moore. Our executive producer is Mark Lammers. Our show consultant is Gloria Skursky. Gabe Wimberly is our audio engineer and mixer. Zach Kramer runs the lights and cameras. Derek Smith is our production specialist, and Jason Garrison is our production manager. Kelly May heads up our marketing and promotions, along with Mike Shea and Bridget Dillenberger. Alyssa Stephenson handles the website, and Steve Wright is our designer. Bill Dean and Andreas Kruja are the engineers for the show, and our chief content officer is Colin Shenamblo. Our music is from Universal Production Music. Brick by Brick, Solutions for a Thriving Community is a production of CET and Think TV, Southwest Ohio PBS member stations.